Haven Arrest Missionary Baptist Church Sunday School Lesson number 2, Sunday, September 9th, 2018. The lesson is entitled Creations in Sky, Sea, and Land. The lesson text comes from Genesis chapter 1, verses 14 through 25. We were asked to read related scriptures, Psalms 19, 1 through 6, 104, 24 through 30. The places are heaven and earth. The time is unknown. This week we continue our study of God's work in creation. We would look specifically at the creatures he made to fill the sky, sea, and land. We also look at the role of light in the world. God was fully in control of every little detail as he prepared the world for us to live in. This week we look again at the heaven and the earth. This is the area and focus of God's activity for our learning this week. Today's aim, facts, to show the reader that God displays his glory through the creation, especially through the creation of light and life in this world. Principle, to acknowledge that God is the creator of all light and life. Application, to show that we as Christians can see how the nature of God is reflected in all his creation. Illustrating the lesson, God had us in mind when he created the earth for us. He gave us light to illuminate our world. God is the author of light. The clearest light he has given us is the light of his word. Practical points. 1. In creation, God demonstrates his mastery over time and space. Genesis 1:14. 2. When God has spoken, it is so. We can stand on his word. Verse 15. 3. God designs all things to declare his glory and power. Verses 15 through 16. 4. We have no cause for fear when we know God watches day and night. Verses 17 through 19. 5. What God creates, he feels. God does not leave a void. Verses 20 through 21. 6. God sustains all life in all its variety, according to his perfect plan. Verses 22 through 23. 7. In God's control and perfect plan, his creation is still good. Verses 24 through 25. Golden text. God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. Genesis 1:16. Today we have two lesson outlines. The first, lights in the sky, Genesis 1:14 through 19. And the second is life throughout the world, Genesis 1:20 through 25. Introduction. The creation story in the Bible is not only one in existence. Some of the ancient pagan nations had their own creation stories. In most of those, however, the material universe is viewed as eternal, and the gods were the ones who were brought into existence. The Babylonian story named Enuma Elish begins with a watery, formless universe that produced two gods. The Enuma Elish was discovered in the middle of the 19th century when archaeologists dug into the library of King Ashurbanipal of Nineveh. Religious texts were found that contained a few superficial similarities to the opening chapters of Genesis. Only in Genesis do we see God existing from all eternity, long before the creation of the universe. God is the source of the universe and the power behind it. He is not a product of his creation. Lights in the sky, Genesis 1:14. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be by signs and for seasons and for days and years." Verse 15. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so. Verse 16. And God made two great lights, the lesser light to rule the day, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. Verse 17. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. Verse 18. And to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. Verse 19. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day. Their purposes. Genesis 1:14 through 15. The fourth day of creation parallels day 1 in which light was created. On this day, God created the luminous bodies that would provide the light day and night. We are not told what the source of light was prior to this day, but on this fourth day, the sun was created to rule the day, and the moon and stars were created to rule the night. Were they there prior to this day without being previously revealed? Or did God himself serve as the source of original light? Revelations 22:5 suggests that the latter idea is plausible. Genesis 1:14 through 15 indicates four purposes for the heavenly luminaries. First, they were to distinguish day and night. This is parallel to the statement in verse 4 that when the original light was created, God divided the light from the darkness, after which he called the light day and the darkness he called night. The specific location in the firmament of the heaven, verse 14, describes the spatial relationship of these bodies of light with the earth. The second purpose for these bodies was to provide signs that communicate to mankind. While those who promote astrology assign meaning through the signs of the zodiac, this is surely not what is meant. The luminaries are signs of the power and majesty of God, and seen in such scripture verses as, when I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and stars which thou hast ordained. What is man that thou art mindful of him, and the son of man that thou visitest him? Psalms 8:3 through 4. Psalms 19 tells us that the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork, verse 1. This message of God's greatness is communicated to the entire world, verses 3 through 4. The third purpose of these bodies was to distinguish seasons, which would also provide for the calendar of events God's people would later observe. Israel's feasts and other religious observations would occur according to the seasons and months of the year. Today we have seasons dependent on the position of these same luminaries. The fourth purpose was the illumination of the earth. By being placed high above, they would give light to the entire earth. Their placement, Genesis 1:16 through 17. God made two of the lights to be the primary ones. The one referred to as the greater light was to be prominent during the day, and the other referred to as the lesser light was to be prominent during the night. They are said to rule in those realms, that is, to have dominion over them or to govern them. Daylight would be non-existent without the sun, and on moonless nights the sky would be completely black apart from the stars. They do display their dominion. The creation of the stars almost sounds like an afterthought. God also made the stars. They are in a different category from the prominent lights. When the sun comes out during the day, they disappear from sight completely. And when the moon comes out during the night, those nearby fade out or appear much dimmer. In fact, we tend to think of them as twinkling, suggesting a minor role in the night sky. In God's eyes, however, they are important and add beauty for us to enjoy. God never intended that these luminaries be objects of worship, though we know this was the case in many ancient pagan nations. There even came a time when Israel fell into this false worship. In Mesopotamia, where Abraham was from, such worship was common, and in Egypt, the land from which Israel eventually would be delivered, the sun god was their primary god among hundreds of others. Such worldly influence is dangerous to God's children, and we must always be on guard against slipping into false theology. The extremity of Israel's departure from God later in their history is recorded in the following terms. And they left all the commandments of the Lord their God and made them molten images, even 2 calves, and made a grove and worshipped all the host of heaven and served Baal. 2 Kings 17:16. Even after seeing all that God had done for them throughout their history, they departed far from him. That serves as a warning for every believer. Their prominence. Genesis 1:18 through 19. The sun, moon, and stars were specifically placed in the firmament of the heaven, verse 17, in order to shine light on the earth. In order for them to be effective immediately upon being created, God had to make them with appearance of age, just as he did other things. Science tells us, for example, that the light we receive on earth from the stars comes from millions of light years away. So God apparently created them with their light waves already spanning the distance to earth. God's control in not only creating but also placing these bodies of light is obvious. He made them and set them right where he wanted them to be so that they would give the light on earth that he intended. In this specific placement, they accomplished exactly what he intended in ruling both day and night. Even this aspect of creation speaks strongly of the work of a creator and dispels the notion that everything evolved in a series of minute changes over long periods of time. While the creation of the stars comes off almost as incidental, we know that was not really the case. The statement that God also made the stars is remarkable. In the ancient Middle East, other religions worshiped, deified, and mystified the stars. Israel's neighbors revered the stars and looked to them for guidance. In contrast, the biblical creation story gives the stars only the barest mention and showed great contempt for ancient Babylonian astrology. Once again, we read that after God commanded creative activity, it was so. Genesis 1:15. And it was good, verses 18. Moses then completed his account of this part of the creation by stating, and the evening and the morning were the 4th day, verse 19. From then on, the lights ruling day and night would be operative in this new world. Life throughout the world, verse 20. And God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that have life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. Verse 21. And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly, after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind, and God saw that it was good. Verse 22. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the sea, and let the fowl multiply in the earth. Verse 23. And the evening and the morning were the 5th day. Verse 24. And God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature, after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beast of the earth after his kind, and it was so. Verse 25, and God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and God saw that it was good. Creatures in the water and air, Genesis 1:20 through 21. On day 2, God created the firmament with waters both above it and below it, leaving an expanse in between. On day 3, he gathered the waters beneath the firmament into seas, making the dry land appear. Now on the 5th day, God ordered that the seas and the firmament be filled with octic and flying creatures. The creatures for the dry land would come on the next day. By then, God completely filled his creation with living things of every sort. God ordered an abundance of living creatures to occupy his waters. O Lord, how manifold are thy works. In wisdom hast thou made them all. The earth is full of thy riches. So is this great and wide sea, wherein all things creeping innumerable, both small and great beasts. Psalms 104:24 through 25. Scientists tell us that the oceans cover 71% of the Earth's surface, amounting to approximately 140 million square miles, and that the average depth is around 12,000 feet. Within that space, there are nearly 30,000 species of fish, with more being discovered continually. Among them are the great whales, Genesis 1:21. The Hebrew term refers to large sea creatures and includes whales, mammals, sharks, fish, and sea serpents. One of the greatest creatures on record was a blue whale measuring 110 feet long. Another weighed 191 tons at capture. Huge whale sharks also exist, reaching up to 41 feet in length. These are a couple of examples of God's great water creatures. On the other extreme are zooplanktons, some measuring less than 2 millicrometers. The same kind of diversity exists among the birds. A comparison of eagles with hummingbirds, for example, helps us see God's variety. There are well over 10,000 known species, and more are being discovered regularly. To appreciate God's creative genius in the realm of featured creatures, all one has to do is live in or visit a forested area. Sit outside at nighttime and early morning and listen. Mandate to produce, Genesis 1:22 to 23. For the first time, we read that God blessed his creatures and commanded them to reproduce. This was never said about the plant life, so there is a distinction between that and these creatures. Both the creatures in the water and those in the air are addressed. One important aspect of this is their reproduction after their kind, verse 21, again stated for both water and flying creatures. This would indicate reproduction along the lines of species. This important statement refutes the teaching of evolution, which has fish and birds evolving in a convoluted eon-long process from a single or original form. In reality, God set their species from the very beginning. We recognize that within species there are sometimes mutations or development, but the basic groups have been existent since creation. In a book titled Creation, The Facts of Life, Gary E. Parker examines the approaches of biochemistry to man's ancestors and makes the following observations. 1. Blood precipitation tests indicate the chimpanzee is man's closest relative. 2. Milk chemistry indicates that the donkey is man's closest relative. 3. Cholesterol level tests indicate that the garter snake is man's closest relative. 4. Tear enzyme chemistry indicates that the chicken is man's closest relative. 5. On the basis of another type of blood chemistry test, the butter bean is man's closest relative. How such tests were conducted is not discussed, but these results do reveal the extreme inaccuracy of revolutionary teaching. On the other hand, the facts state in Scripture gives us the truth about God's marvelous creative activities and gives us reassurance of his absolute control over his creation. Creatures on the earth. Genesis 1:24 through 25. 5 times the phrase after his kind or after their kind is used in these two verses. There is no hint of anything evolving, least of all mankind, verses 26 through 27. This was the climactic day of creation when the newly formed earth was populated. The earth, which on the third day had been decked with floral in preparation for the faunal life, is ready for its inhabitants on the corresponding sixth day. 3 categories of land animals are mentioned as having been created simultaneously: cattle, creeping things, and beasts of the earth. This categorization eventually is intended to cover comprehensively the entire animal kingdom. The term cattle probably refers to those animals that could be domesticated, while the term beast of the earth probably refers to large wild animals not normally tamed in any way. The term creeping things refers to insects, worms, reptiles, and others low on the earth. The cattle were herbivores and capable of being used for labor, while the wild beasts became carnivores with ravenous natures that would best be left in the wild. This probably included the dinosaurs like the behemoth mentioned in Job 40. What happened to the dinosaurs? They did exist, which is well-known fact from archaeological discoveries, but since they have disappeared, we have to wonder about them. Their disappearance is probably connected to Noah's flood. The animals were apparently composed of the same elements as the earth, since they are said to have been brought forth from the earth. Their bodies, like human bodies, go back to dust after death. Along with the fish and bird worlds, they also have conscious life like humans, unlike the vegetative world. Since they were not made in the image of God like mankind, though, they do not have eternal spirits. Next week, we are going to be reminded that we are God's greatest creation of all. Questions. 1. How does the fourth day of creation parallel the first? 2. What are the 4 purposes in creating the luminaries? 3. What are the 2 primary luminaries, and what specifically were they created to do? 4. Why might we wrongfully think the stars are less important in God's view? 5. How does the text emphasize God's complete control over the luminaries? 6. What did God create on the 5th day, and how does this parallel with days 2 and 3? 7. What distinction do we see in the creation of these creatures? 8. What important aspect is noted regarding the reproduction of creatures? 9. What was created on day 6? 10. What 3 categories of animals were created that day? How do they compare to man? This concludes the Sunday School lesson for Sunday, September 9, 2018. Thank you for listening. God bless.